What if a single moment of cruelty could shatter a man's carefully built world, and only his daughter's innocent wisdom could piece it back together? On a snowy Christmas Eve in downtown Chicago, 42-year-old tech mogul Richard Blackwell stood in the marble lobby of the Grand Ambassador Hotel, adjusting his platinum cufflinks as he prepared for the most important business dinner of his career. The hotel buzzed with holiday energy. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over red velvet drapes, and the scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air. Richard had built his empire from nothing, turning a small software company into a billion-dollar corporation. But tonight felt different. Tonight, everything he'd worked for hung in the balance. As he walked toward the private dining room where potential investors waited, he had no idea that in just a few hours, a young waitress carrying a tray of champagne would become the catalyst for the most important lesson of his life. Where are you watching from tonight? Richard's daughter, Katie, bounded into the hotel lobby just as he finished checking his reflection in the polished marble wall. At 8 years old, she had her mother's gentle brown eyes and an infectious smile that could melt the hardest hearts. She wore a red velvet Christmas dress with white lace trim, her hair carefully braided with tiny silver bells that chimed softly as she moved. "Daddy, you look so handsome," she giggled, wrapping her small arms around his legs. Richard's expression softened for just a moment before his business mask slipped back into place. Tonight was too important for distractions, even adorable ones. "Katie, sweetheart, remember what we discussed. This is a very important dinner. You'll sit quietly with your coloring books while Daddy talks business, okay?" His tone was gentle but firm. The merger with Steinberg Industries could double his company's value overnight, but the elderly German investors were notoriously particular about everything, from the wine selection to the service quality. The Grand Ambassador's private dining room gleamed with holiday elegance. A massive Christmas tree dominated one corner, adorned with golden ornaments and white lights that sparkled like stars. The mahogany table was set with the finest china, and soft jazz played in the background. Richard had spared no expense. This had to be perfect. As they entered the dining room, Richard noticed the young waitress arranging fresh holly centerpieces. She couldn't have been more than 25, with kind eyes and a gentle manner as she worked. Her name tag read Jessica. She moved efficiently but carefully, clearly taking pride in her work despite the modest black uniform and comfortable shoes that suggested long hours on her feet. "Good evening, sir. I'll be taking care of your party tonight," Jessica said with a warm, professional smile. "Is there anything special you'd like me to prepare for your daughter?" Richard barely glanced at her, already mentally rehearsing his presentation. "Just keep the service smooth and invisible. This dinner cannot have any interruptions or mistakes." Katie smiled shyly at Jessica from behind her father's coat. "I like your earrings. They're sparkly like Christmas stars." Jessica's face lit up. "Thank you, sweetie. My grandmother gave them to me. She always said they'd bring good luck." She knelt down to Katie's level, her voice gentle and warm. "Would you like me to bring you some hot chocolate later? I make it special with extra marshmallows." "That would be wonderful," Richard said curtly, already turning away to review his notes. "Just ensure everything runs exactly on schedule." As Jessica returned to the kitchen, Katie tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, she seems really nice. And sad, too. Did you see how tired she looked?" Richard was absorbed in his tablet, calculating profit margins and market projections. "Katie, please. Focus on your coloring. The investors will be here any moment." Through the tall windows, snow began falling more heavily, blanketing the city in pristine white. The scene should have felt magical, but tension filled the air as Richard checked his watch repeatedly. Everything had to be perfect. His reputation, his company's future, and his family's legacy all depended on the next 3 hours going flawlessly. As the first investors arrived, Richard straightened his tie and prepared to charm his way to the biggest deal of his career, unaware that his carefully controlled evening was about to take an unexpected turn. The dinner began beautifully. Heinrich Steinberg, a distinguished 70-year-old industrialist with silver hair and keen blue eyes, seemed impressed with Richard's presentation. His business partner, Klaus Mueller, nodded approvingly as Richard outlined their expansion plans across European markets. Katie sat quietly in the corner, occasionally glancing up from her coloring book to watch the snowfall outside. Jessica moved gracefully between the tables, refilling water glasses and serving the first course with practiced efficiency. She'd been working double shifts for 3 weeks, saving every penny for her younger brother's college textbooks. Tonight's tips would finally put her over the goal she'd been desperately trying to reach before Christmas break ended. The profit projections are extraordinary, Heinrich said, raising his wine glass. Your company's growth trajectory reminds me of my own early days in Munich. Richard felt a surge of triumph. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. This was the moment he'd worked toward for 5 years, the validation of every sacrifice, every late night, every missed family dinner. Then disaster struck in the most ordinary way. As Jessica approached the table carrying a tray of the second course, her foot caught the edge of a small decorative rug that had shifted slightly during the evening. She stumbled, fighting to regain her balance, but the tray tilted. A single glass of red wine toppled, splashing across the white tablecloth and spattering Richard's crisp shirt. The dining room fell silent except for the soft jazz still playing in the background. Jessica's face went pale. "Oh my God, I am so sorry. Please let me." "What the hell is wrong with you?" Richard's voice exploded across the room, his carefully maintained composure shattering instantly. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? This is a $2,000 shirt, and this dinner is worth millions." Heinrich and Klaus exchanged uncomfortable glances. Katie's coloring book slipped from her lap as she stared at her father in shock. "Sir, I'm truly sorry." "It was an accident," Jessica said, her voice trembling as she frantically dabbed at the tablecloth with her napkin. "Please let me get club soda. I can clean." "You can clean nothing." Richard stood abruptly, his face flushed with rage. "You're obviously too incompetent to handle a simple serving job. Look at yourself. You're probably some high school dropout who can't even walk straight. How does someone like you even get hired at a place like this?" The words hung in the air like poison. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but she stood straighter, maintaining her dignity even as her world crumbled. She'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school, graduating with honors while supporting her family. But Richard saw none of that, only an obstacle to his perfect evening. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Heinrich slowly set down his fork. "Richard, perhaps we should." "No, this is unacceptable," Richard continued, his voice growing louder. "This is exactly the kind of sloppy service that destroys business relationships. You've probably ruined everything I've worked for tonight." Katie suddenly stood up, her small hands clenched into fists. Her brown eyes blazed with an emotion that made her seem far older than her 8 years. "Daddy, stop," she said, her voice cutting through his tirade like a bell. The room froze. What would his daughter say next? And how would her words change everything Richard thought he knew about success and worth? Katie walked slowly toward her father, her Christmas bells chiming softly with each step. The investors watched in fascination as this small girl approached the towering businessman who moments before had commanded the entire room. "Daddy," Katie said, her voice steady despite her youth, "you're being mean to the nice lady." Richard's face reddened further. "Katie, go back to your coloring. This doesn't concern you." But Katie didn't move. Instead, she turned to Jessica, who was still standing frozen with her napkin clutched in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Are you okay?" Katie asked softly, reaching out to touch Jessica's arm. "My daddy didn't mean to hurt your feelings. He just gets scared sometimes when things don't go perfectly." The simple kindness in those words hit the room like a lightning bolt. Heinrich leaned back in his chair, watching with growing interest as the real drama of the evening unfolded. Richard stared at his daughter in disbelief. "Katie, that's enough." "No, Daddy, it's not enough." Katie's voice grew stronger. She looked up at her father with those same brown eyes that had charmed him countless times, but now they held disappointment that cut deeper than any business failure could. "You always tell me that being smart and rich doesn't matter if you're not kind. You said Mommy taught you that before she died. But right now, you're not being kind at all." The mention of his late wife hit Richard like a physical blow. Sarah had indeed taught him that wealth without compassion was meaningless. She'd volunteered at shelters, tutored disadvantaged children, and always treated service workers with genuine respect and gratitude. Jessica wiped her tears, looking between the father and daughter with growing understanding. "It's okay, sweetie. Accidents happen. Sometimes grown-ups get upset." "But it's not okay," Katie insisted. She reached into her small purse and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, her Christmas money from her grandmother. "Here," she said, offering it to Jessica. "This is for being nice to me earlier about the hot chocolate. and for having sparkly earrings like Christmas stars. Jessica's breath caught. "Oh, honey, I can't take your Christmas money." "Please," Katie said. "My daddy has lots of money, but right now I think you need kindness more than he needs another dollar." The profound wisdom in those words echoed through the silent dining room. Heinrich and Klaus sat transfixed, witnessing something far more valuable than any business presentation. Richard felt something crack inside his chest, not his pride, but something deeper. The protective shell he'd built around his heart since Sarah's death began to crumble as he saw himself through his daughter's eyes. He saw the man he'd become versus the man his wife had loved, and the father Katie deserved. Heinrich cleared his throat gently. "Richard, your daughter is remarkable. She reminds me of my own granddaughter. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments." Jessica knelt down to Katie's level, her voice thick with emotion. "You know what? I think you might be the kindest person I've met all year. And that's saying something because I meet a lot of people." As Katie smiled through her own tears, Richard realized that the most important merger of his life wasn't happening at this business table. It was the reuniting of his heart with the values he'd forgotten he once held dear. Richard stood frozen, watching his 8-year-old daughter show more character and leadership than he'd displayed in years. The contrast was devastating and beautiful at the same time. Around the table, Heinrich and Klaus waited quietly, no longer interested in profit margins or market shares. They were witnessing the transformation of a human soul. "Katie," Richard said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. His hands trembled as the weight of his actions crashed over him. "You're right. I am scared. I've been scared every day since your mother died that I wasn't good enough, as a father, as a businessman, as a person." He turned to Jessica, who still held Katie's crumpled $5 bill in her shaking hands. "Jessica, I owe you the deepest apology. What I said was cruel, inaccurate, and completely unforgivable." Jessica looked up at him, surprise replacing the hurt in her eyes. "Sir, you don't need to." "Yes, I do," Richard interrupted gently. He pulled out his wallet and removed 5 $100 bills. "This isn't charity or guilt money. This is what respect looks like when it's backed by action. You've clearly worked hard to build your skills and grace under pressure. I can see that now." But then he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He set the money aside and instead removed his platinum cufflinks, the ones he'd worn to every important business meeting for 5 years, a gift from Sarah. "These belong to my wife's grandfather. She gave them to me and said they'd remind me to always lead with my heart." He placed them gently in Jessica's hand. "She would have wanted you to have them. Not because you need my pity, but because you showed my daughter and me what real dignity looks like." Jessica's eyes widened. "I can't accept these. They're too valuable, and they mean too much to your family." "They mean exactly what they should mean," Richard said, his voice growing stronger. "Kindness given when kindness is hardest to give. My wife would have loved you, Jessica. She would have seen what Katie saw immediately, your good heart." Heinrich stood slowly, his aged face creased with a knowing smile. "Richard, in 40 years of business, I've seen many presentations. But tonight, I've witnessed something far more impressive than profit projections. I've seen a man remember who he truly is." Klaus nodded in agreement. "The merger was already approved based on your financial performance. But now we know we're partnering with someone who can grow and change. That's the rarest quality in business." Katie clapped her hands together, her Christmas bells ringing like a celebration. "Does this mean the nice lady doesn't have to be sad anymore?" Jessica knelt down and hugged Katie tightly. "You know what, sweetheart? I think this turned out to be the best Christmas surprise I could have asked for." Richard felt tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in 3 years begin to fall. "Katie, you've taught me something tonight that all my business success couldn't. You've shown me that the most important deals we make aren't about money, they're about how we treat each other." If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside the Grand Ambassador's dining room, something warmer than any fire had begun to glow. The real celebration was just beginning. 1 year later, Richard stood in the same private dining room at the Grand Ambassador Hotel, but this time the occasion was purely personal. The room was decorated for a different kind of celebration, Jessica's graduation from nursing school. Katie, now 9 and even more spirited, helped arrange flowers on each table while humming Christmas carols. "Is she here yet, Daddy?" Katie asked, bouncing on her toes with excitement. "She'll be here soon, sweetheart," Richard smiled, adjusting the small gift box in his jacket pocket. Inside was a simple gold necklace with a star pendant, not expensive but meaningful. The business merger with Steinberg Industries had indeed gone through, making Richard's company one of the most successful in the tech industry. But more importantly, it had marked the beginning of a friendship that changed all their lives. Heinrich and Klaus had become regular visitors, often sharing stories of their own families and the lessons learned from watching that transformative Christmas Eve. Jessica arrived wearing her crisp new nursing uniform, her face glowing with pride and accomplishment. The scholarship program Richard had quietly established, not just for Jessica, but for other service workers pursuing education, had helped 12 people achieve their dreams in the past year. "I can't believe you all did this," Jessica said, tears of joy sparkling in her eyes as she looked around the room filled with friends, family, and the unlikely group that had become her chosen family. "We couldn't miss celebrating your achievement," Richard said warmly. "You've taught us that true success isn't measured in bank accounts, it's measured in the lives we touch and the kindness we share." Katie ran up to Jessica with a handmade card. "I drew you wearing your sparkly earrings and your new nurse hat." Jessica opened the card to find a crayon drawing of 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, under a Christmas tree. The words, "Thank you for teaching my daddy how to have a kind heart again," were written in Katie's careful handwriting. "This is perfect," Jessica whispered, hugging Katie tightly. Heinrich raised a champagne glass. "To Jessica, whose grace under pressure taught us all what true character looks like. And to Katie, whose wisdom reminds us that the most important lessons often come from the smallest teachers. And to my late wife Sarah," Richard added softly, "who would have loved every person in this room, and who taught me that wealth without kindness is poverty of the spirit." As they toasted, Jessica fingered the star necklace Richard had given her. "You know, my grandmother always said these earrings would bring good luck. I think she was right. They brought me all of you." Katie giggled. "Maybe the luck was for everyone, not just you." Outside, Chicago bustled with its usual energy, but inside this room, for lives had been permanently woven together by one moment of crisis that became a lifetime of connection. Richard had learned that his greatest success would never be listed on any financial statement. It was the man he chose to be each day and the example he set for his daughter. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. As the celebration continued into the evening, Richard reflected on how sometimes our worst moments become the doorways to our best selves, and how the smallest voices often carry the most powerful truths.